The day my mother told me to sleep on the floor, something inside me snapped, but I didn't shout, cry, or beg. I simply smiled, nodded, and started looking for real estate. Sometimes the quietest revenge is the most elegant one. At 28, with a degree in architecture and dreams still intact despite a brutal job market, I never expected to be reduced to curling up between my parents' old coffee table and the TV stand. But when they handed my childhood bedroom to my teenage brother because he needed space and offered me a sleeping bag instead, I realized I'd overstayed my welcome in more ways than one. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They had no idea I was learning the most important one of all: how to disappear without drama and return with deeds, not words. 6 weeks later, while they were measuring curtains in his new room, I was supervising the excavation of a swimming pool in the backyard of the house right next door. This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about reclamation. When your own mother hands you a sleeping bag and tells you to figure your life out, you learn not to beg for space, you buy your own. It happened so fast that I almost laughed. One morning, I was someone's daughter. The next, I was an obstacle in my parents' hallway. My room, given to my younger brother without so much as a conversation. My belongings, shoved into boxes. My new bed, a dusty corner of the living room floor. "You'll manage," they said. "You're not a kid anymore." They were right. I wasn't a kid. I was a woman with a degree in architecture, a job offer waiting for me, and a quiet plan forming while they thought I was broken. I didn't argue. I got up early, left before they woke, and spent lunch breaks signing papers they never thought I could afford. 6 weeks later, I didn't just walk out, I moved next door. And while they sipped coffee in their remodeled kitchen, I broke ground for a pool right in their line of sight. This is how you reclaim your worth, one blueprint at a time. Before I became an afterthought in my own home, I was the heartbeat of it. Growing up, I was the kind of daughter who made parenting look easy. Straight A's, never missed curfew, always the first to volunteer for family chores. I learned how to make French toast just to surprise mom on Mother's Day. When I was 10, dad taught me how to change a tire, but I went a step further and learned how to rotate them. I wasn't just a big sister, I was the example Evan was expected to follow. We had traditions. Every Friday was movie night. Dad picked the film, mom picked the snacks, and I was in charge of setting up our makeshift theater in the living room. Evan would fall asleep before the second act, curled under my arm, and I'd carry him to bed without waking him. I remember cold winters when I'd shovel the driveway before school so dad wouldn't be late for work. I remember hot summers helping mom in the garden, trying to get those damn tomatoes to grow. Every act of service felt like a stitch in the fabric of our closeness. We weren't rich, but we were a team. When I got into Cornell's architecture program, the whole neighborhood knew by sundown. Mom cried, dad grilled steaks, and Evan high-fived me so hard he left a bruise. They hung my acceptance letter on the fridge like it was a trophy. That night, I overheard mom whisper, "She's gonna build a life we never even dreamed of." I held on to that. College challenged me in every way. The deadlines, the studio hours, the constant critique, it almost broke me. But I called home every Sunday, sent Evan care packages before finals, came back every summer and repainted a different room in the house. I never outgrew being their daughter, their helper, their pride. So when I graduated and the market crashed, it felt less like a failure and more like bad timing. I came home to regroup, to find footing, to breathe. It's just for a few months, I promised, until something lands. Mom welcomed me with open arms at first. She restocked the fridge with my favorite yogurt. Dad helped me print resumes. Evan joked that the house felt better when I was in it. Those early weeks felt almost sacred. We ate dinner together again, watched old movies, laughed like no time had passed. I cooked 3 times a week. I helped fix the back deck. I was a grown woman trying to carry my share. And for a while, I believed they saw me as that. But love, I've learned, is often quiet when respect begins to erode. And no one ever says, we're about to stop valuing you, they just do. And one day, the girl they once toasted became the girl they walked over to get to the TV. The signs weren't loud. They didn't come in the form of slammed doors or screaming matches. They whispered, softly, repeatedly, until I began to wonder if I was imagining things. It started with breakfast. Mom used to brew an extra cup of coffee for me every morning, just the way I liked it, one sugar, a splash of cream. But somewhere between week 3 and week 5 of my moving back home, the second mug disappeared. I'd find her at the kitchen table with Evan chatting about his classes, 2 steaming cups already in front of them. I poured my own in silence. Then came the calendar. The family whiteboard once had room for everyone's schedule, mine included, but slowly my interviews and networking events got wiped away, replaced with Evan's debate practice or SAT prep. I started keeping my own planner. No one asked where I was going anymore. Conversations began to pass me like wind through an open window. At dinner, I'd speak about an architecture webinar I attended or a promising recruiter email, and Mom would hum distractedly while scrolling her phone. Dad would nod, already mid-sentence about Evan's grades. Evan, bless him, tried to ask questions, but even his voice got drowned out by Mom's new obsession, his college future. He needs a quiet place to study, she said one evening, glancing subtly toward my bedroom door. I looked up. He has a desk in his room. Yes, but he's growing. He needs space. So do I. She gave a tight smile. Of course, sweetheart. The next morning, I found my towels in the basement laundry machine instead of the bathroom. Evan has morning workouts, Mom explained. He needs to shower first, just for now. Then it was the closet. My boxes, neatly stacked in the hallway, stayed there longer than necessary. When I asked Dad if I could use part of the hall closet, he shook his head. We need to keep that for guests, in case anyone visits. No one visited. No one ever did. Even the living room, once our shared space shifted, Evan began hosting his friends more often. Loud laughter filled the house. I retreated to the backyard or locked myself in my room. Once, I returned from a job fair to find Evan and 3 classmates sprawled on the couch watching action movies. My job applications were buried under popcorn bags and soda cans. You don't mind, right? He asked. We needed somewhere chill. I said nothing, just collected my laptop and left. But the worst part wasn't the logistics. It wasn't the coffee, the closet, or the towels. It was the silence. The way my name vanished from conversations. The way their eyes passed over me at dinner. I had become a shadow in the home I once lit up. And still, I convinced myself it was temporary. Once I got hired, things would click back into place. That love, surely, would find its way through the cracks again. I didn't realize yet I wasn't waiting for love. I was waiting for permission to matter. It started with a noise. Not a crash or a shout, just the low hum of Evan's music bleeding through the floorboards, the way it never had before. I was returning from a second meeting with a local contractor who'd offered to let me assist on a mid-sized eco-retail project. My heart was full. I wasn't hired yet, but it felt close. So close. I stopped by the market and picked up fresh basil and goat cheese to make one of Sandra's favorite dishes, baked ziti with caramelized onions. A quiet celebration. The house was too still when I walked in. No clatter from the kitchen, no voices. Hello? I called. No answer. As I headed upstairs, I noticed something odd. My slippers were missing from the bottom of the staircase. And then, on the landing, it hit me. My stuff. My clothes, sketch pads, toiletries, boxes of portfolio samples, and even the small ceramic lamp I'd made in high school were all dumped along the hallway wall. Some were stacked. Others had clearly been tossed. My favorite sweater had fallen onto a dog-eared shoebox. My bedroom door, formerly mine, was wide open. And it was no longer mine at all. The space had been completely redone. Gone were my architecture posters and the blueprint I'd drawn in college and framed with my own hands. The pale blue paint I had chosen during the sophomore year had been replaced with fresh lavender, Evan's favorite color. A queen-sized bed now sat in the middle, next to a brand new standing desk with a whiteboard labeled SAT goals. My drafting table, replaced by a console with his gaming setup. I stood there, stunned. My hands still clutched the grocery bag, its plastic handles cutting into my fingers. Then I heard her behind me. "Oh, Izzy, you're back," Sandra said, appearing at the top of the stairs with a laundry basket on her hip. "We moved your things out. Evan needed a better setup for his senior year." My lips parted, but I couldn't form words. "You moved me out of my room?" I finally managed. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't even pause. "Well, you were out all day. We figured it was a good time. You've been coming and going so much." "I sleep here," I said, almost in disbelief. "I live here." "We know, sweetheart," she replied, already walking past me. "That's why we made space for you in the living room." Before I could process what she meant, Robert emerged from the master bedroom holding his tablet. "We can set up the sleeping bag from the attic, the one we used on the Grand Canyon trip. It's comfortable enough for now." "For now?" I repeated. Evan walked out of his room with a box of headphones. He avoided eye contact. "I didn't ask them to do this," he said quietly. "I swear." But he hadn't stopped them either. The bag of groceries hit the floor with a dull thud. "Where am I supposed to keep my things?" Sandra didn't even look up. "Just stack them in the hall for now. Evan's study materials take priority this semester." I stood there, framed in the hallway like an unwanted portrait, heart pounding in my ears. The space that once smelled like home, like my old shampoo, fresh paper, wood polish, now reeked of erasure. Dinner that night felt like performance art. Evan's new room was the main topic. Robert raved about the desk's ergonomic features. Sandra had paint samples fanned out like a proud decorator. Evan said little. They never asked why I wasn't eating, why I had red marks across my palms from gripping the grocery bag too tight. No one even said thank you for the meal I still cooked. Later that night, I unrolled the sleeping bag between the couch and the bookshelf. The floor was colder than I remembered. Harder. I used a sweatshirt as a pillow. Every time someone went to the kitchen, I had to curl up smaller so they wouldn't trip over me. The silence was the worst. Not a cruel word, not a single insult, but the omission of my presence, the complete lack of concern, was deafening. The next day, my toothbrush had been moved to the downstairs half bath. Sandra's reason? Too many toiletries upstairs. Evan needs that space. Robert asked if I could clean the guest bathroom a little better next time because Evan's friends had noticed grime. I hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences all day. That night, lying on that floor in a sleeping bag that smelled of mildew and memory, I stared up at the ceiling and realized they hadn't just moved me out of my room. They'd moved me out of their definition of family. And in the quiet that followed, rage didn't rise, tears didn't fall. Resolve did. Because if I was going to be invisible in this house, I'd make sure the next time they saw me, I'd be impossible to ignore. Grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the way you fold a blanket, in the way you step quietly through your own house so no one remembers you're there. For me, grief looked like a sleeping bag rolled tightly under the side table. A tote bag that held everything I needed to function: laptop charger, a single change of clothes, deodorant. I'd carry it from room to room like a traveler, only I had no destination. That first week on the floor, I told myself it was temporary. I still had interviews lined up and contacts to follow up with. I believed I'd make it out soon. But by week 3, I wasn't so sure. The hardwood bruised my hips. My lower back throbbed each morning. One night, Sandra stepped on my ankle by accident, mumbled, "Sorry," half asleep, and kept walking. Another time, Robert tripped on my charger cord and told me to keep my things tidier. The living room became a battleground for invisibility. I had to pack everything away before sunrise. If I left so much as a pillow in sight during the day, Sandra would ask me to keep the space guest ready. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked anything. One night, Evan brought 3 friends over to watch a movie. They didn't know I was there until I came in from the backyard and startled them. "Oh," one girl said, blinking. "I thought this was just storage now." Evan laughed uncomfortably. "Nah, that's my sister. She's just between things." Between things. That phrase stayed with me for days. Sandra continued to ask for chores. "Since you're home anyway, I cleaned the bathroom twice a week, cooked dinner 3 nights out of guilt, and helped Evan edit his college essays because no one else had the patience." But even when I contributed, I wasn't acknowledged. I remember one morning I was mopping the kitchen when Robert walked in, grabbed a coffee, and said, "We should really hire someone to help around here." I froze, mop still in hand. Not even a glance in my direction. And then there were the whispers. No arguments, no drama, just quiet comments I wasn't meant to hear. "She's not ambitious enough," Sandra said one night through the bedroom door. "She should have picked a real major," Robert answered. "Maybe this will finally motivate her." Motivate me, as if humiliation was some kind of fuel? Their words stripped something from me, not just dignity, identity. I stopped checking my email. What was the point? I stopped writing. I stopped sketching. The passion I once had for buildings, spaces, beauty, it dulled. When I looked at blank pages in my sketchbook, they stayed blank. I spent hours scrolling listings for basement rentals I couldn't afford. Considered sleeping in my car. I even packed a duffel once. Got as far as the garage before breaking down, sobbing into the steering wheel. But in that rock bottom moment, something cracked open. A memory. I am 10 years old building a model of the Eiffel Tower out of toothpicks. Sandra had laughed and said, "You really think you can be an architect?" And I had said, "Watch me. Watch me." I wiped my face and went back inside. The next morning, I forced myself to check the one email I'd avoided, the one from Hartley & Co., a sustainable design firm I'd interviewed with weeks ago. Subject: employment offer, junior designer position. I blinked, heart racing. They wanted me. A real position, a start date, health insurance, respect. I reread the email 4 times, afraid it might disappear. It didn't. And just like that, the fog lifted. Not all at once, but enough. I didn't cry from happiness. I didn't jump up and down. I sat on the floor, legs crossed on cold wood, and whispered to no one in particular, "This changes everything." Not just because I had a job, but because I had a reason. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want pity. I wanted to rise quietly, strategically. I wanted to build something no one could take from me ever again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling fan, rotating slowly above me, its blades slicing the dark with rhythmic indifference. I thought about all the times I had imagined what success would look like. Corner office, blueprints scattered across a table, clients impressed by my designs. But now, success looked like a key to a door that was mine alone, a space where no one could walk in and take what I'd built, a place where I didn't have to roll up my life each morning and hide it like shame. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to rebuild with silence, with grace, with power. And when they finally noticed I was gone, they'd realize too late. They hadn't broken me. They'd set me free. The first thing I did was open a new bank account. It felt symbolic, like carving out a piece of the world that was mine and mine alone. I didn't tell Sandra or Robert about the job. I didn't announce it at dinner or mention it over morning coffee. They didn't ask, and I had stopped offering. At Hartley & Co., I was treated like a person again. On my first day, I was handed a company laptop, a welcome package, and a desk near the window. My team leader, a woman named Grace, smiled and said, "We're excited to have you. Your portfolio stood out. Wanted to cry. Instead, I smiled back and got to work. Each morning, I left the house early, before anyone else stirred, and took the bus across town. I spent extra hours at the office, not because I had to, but because it felt like oxygen. My ideas were respected, my voice mattered. Grace asked me to weigh in on designs for a community arts center, and when I spoke, people listened. I started wearing real clothes again, not just the same two sweatshirts rotated to look clean, but pressed, slacks and blouses with buttons. I bought a pair of black flats that didn't pinch. At lunch, I researched properties, quietly, obsessively. I knew what I wanted, something close enough to be poetic but far enough to breathe. It took 2 weeks before I found it, a 3-bedroom fixer-upper just 4 doors down from my parents' house. The listing photos showed water stains and shag carpet, but I saw potential. The price was just within reach. With my new job contract and the small inheritance Grandma Ruth had left me, money Sandra and Robert didn't know existed, I qualified for the mortgage. My realtor didn't blink when I asked to keep everything private. We did the walkthroughs during my lunch breaks. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in a notary's office filled with plastic plants and framed motivational quotes. By that weekend, I was a homeowner. But I didn't move in right away. I had plans. The house needed work, lots of it. The floors creaked, the plumbing wheezed, and the paint peeled in strips. But I loved it instantly. It was mine, every inch of it, even the broken ones. I hired a contractor named Malik who was young, enthusiastic, and understood discretion. I want the essentials done in 6 weeks, I told him. Bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, the rest can wait. He nodded. Any design preferences? Minimal, clean, strong, and I want the backyard cleared and leveled. He raised an eyebrow. Thinking about a garden? Eventually, I said, maybe something bolder. After work, I'd slip over to the new house through the back gate. I'd walk room by room with Malik, choosing tiles and light fixtures and approving layouts. My fingers itched to sketch again, and soon I was back to drawing at night. My own designs, just for me. Every decision I made was deliberate: the deep green cabinets in the kitchen, the matte black hardware, and the rainfall showerhead in the bathroom. For the first time in months, I felt powerful, rooted. Back at my parents' house, nothing changed. I still slept on the floor, still cleaned up after dinner, still rolled up my life before sun. But something inside me was shifting. Sandra commented once on the paint smudge on my jeans. You should be careful with your clothes. I will, I said, smiling to myself. Robert asked where I was disappearing to every night. Just working on a side project, I replied. Not a lie. And then one morning over toast, even looked up and said, "You've been different lately." How so? Like, you're winning at something, but you're not telling anyone. I looked him in the eye and said, maybe because no one ever asked. He didn't respond, but he didn't look away. By the 5th week, the inside of my house was almost complete. The bedroom was soft and quiet, the kitchen gleamed, the bathroom made me sigh with relief. I stood in the center of the living room, light pouring in through new windows, and whispered, "Almost there." One more thing remained, and it was going in the backyard. That night, I lay on the floor for what I knew would be one of the last times. The ceiling above me looked the same, but my heart didn't. I wasn't a guest anymore. Not in my own mind. I had somewhere else to go, a place that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. I'd carved it from nothing, brick by brick, decision by decision. I thought about the girl who cried in the garage, who almost gave up. I thought about every time I swallowed my pride to keep the peace. About the silence that had once felt like surrender, but was really just incubation. They thought I was still stuck, but I was already gone. I traced a mental checklist. Final kitchen fixture installed, bedroom curtains hung, new sheets folded on the bed, backyard cleared and ready. Tomorrow, I'd pack my last bag, and the day after, I'd begin building the final part of the plan, something bold, something unforgettable, something that made silence the loudest thing they'd ever hear. Saturday morning arrived like a secret I'd been dying to tell. The sun poured through the curtains as I folded the sleeping bag one last time. I tucked it neatly into a canvas tote, alongside my sweatshirt pillow and a set of mismatched socks. My last load, my last step. I didn't say goodbye, I just slipped out the back door. Malik and his crew had finished the yard 2 days earlier. Clean, level ground stretched behind my house like a blank canvas. At its center sat the frame of something bold. A square perimeter of cement, freshly poured, curing in the summer light. By noon, the truck arrived. It was larger than necessary on purpose. The noise echoed off its metal ramp as workers unloaded tiles, plumbing fixtures, and lengths of decorative stone. Sandra peeked out from her kitchen window. Robert stepped onto their porch with a mug in hand. Evan wandered out barefoot, blinking at the sudden construction chaos happening next door. I didn't look their way. Instead, I grabbed my clipboard and waved to the crew. Pool goes in by Wednesday. I want clean lines, no fencing until final inspection. Yes, ma'am, the foreman called back. I watched as the first scoop of earth was removed, as the frame took shape. My backyard, once overgrown and forgotten, was becoming something impossible to ignore. Around 3 o'clock, Sandra appeared at my side of the property line. She didn't use the gate, just stepped through the bushes, like boundaries didn't matter. Izzy, she said, eyes wide. You live here? I didn't answer at first, let her feel the awkwardness she'd taught me to live in. She looked around the yard, then toward the house. This place was a mess, she said. You bought it? I smiled. 6 weeks ago. Why didn't you say anything? I tilted my head. No one asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Behind her, Robert stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed. Evan hovered near the steps. You're building a pool? She asked. Yes. Her brows drew together. That seems excessive. I raised an eyebrow. Evan needed more space. So did I. She flinched, just slightly. Then, to my surprise, Evan stepped forward. It looks great, he said quietly. Really? For the first time in months, I looked at him and saw not a rival, not even a brother, but a boy raised in the same house of silent favoritism. He hadn't thrown me out, but he hadn't saved me either. And now he was watching me do what no one expected. You want to come see the inside? I asked. His eyes lit up. Seriously? I nodded. Take off your shoes. Sandra said nothing as he followed me toward the porch. Robert called after him. Something clipped, fatherly. But Evan ignored it. Inside, the house gleamed. Evan stood in the doorway, speechless. His gaze swept from the matte green cabinets to the black iron staircase railing. You did all this? With help, I said. But yeah, I designed it. He looked at me, and this time there was no pity in his eyes, just awe. You're really good at this, he said. I know. When he left, Sandra was still in the yard. She didn't ask to come in. She just said, it's a bit much, Isabel. I met her gaze. That's the point. The days that followed became a silent spectacle. Each morning at 7 a.m., the crew arrived with drills, mixers, and purpose. The whir of machines blended with birdsong, creating a symphony of transformation. Neighbors peeked through the blinds. Some walked their dogs slower past my driveway. Others stopped entirely, pretending to tie shoelaces while scanning the construction. It didn't matter. What mattered was the movement, the visibility, the sound of reclamation echoes between the two properties. By Tuesday, the waterfall feature arrived. Sleek granite, imported tile. A low hum of water would soon flow endlessly, like the steady pulse of boundaries enforced. Wednesday afternoon, the final tiles were laid. The pool filled overnight. Thursday morning, I slipped into the clear blue water for the first time. Alone, no ceremony, no witnesses. Just me, floating on my back, watching the sky above my own home, in the shadow of the one that had forgotten me. When I emerged, towel wrapped around my shoulders, I saw Brooke standing by the fence. She looked different, less polished. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, her usual confidence subdued. "That's your pool?" she asked. "Yes." She hesitated. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." A long pause. "I didn't know it would hurt you that much," she said quietly. "It wasn't just the room," I replied. "It was what it meant." She nodded, eyes glassy. "I get that now. I'm sorry." I studied her face and saw a flicker of sincerity I hadn't expected. "We can talk," I said, "but not like this, not through fences." He smiled faintly. "Coffee sometime?" "Coffee," I agreed. That night, I hosted my first dinner on the patio. Just a few colleagues, laughter under string lights, the waterfall murmured behind us. From across the yard, shadows moved behind Sandra's curtains. She was watching. I raised my glass, not in cheers, in closure. Because revenge isn't rage, it's reinvention. And I was just getting started. It started with a pencil, or maybe it started before that, with the way Malik looked at my sketches, head tilted, fingers tapping his clipboard like he wanted to understand more than just dimensions. One night, after the crew had finished tiling the patio, I stayed late to fix a small design element that had been bothering me, an alignment issue with the bench seating near the pool. I didn't expect anyone else to be around, but there he was, sitting on the back steps, nursing a bottle of iced tea. "You always stay late?" he asked. "Only when something's off," I replied, squinting at the pencil marks I'd made earlier. "This line isn't parallel. I can't unsee it." He stood and walked over, hands in his back pockets. "I noticed it too," he said. "Didn't want to say anything in case you liked it that way." "You thought I'd like asymmetry?" I asked, mock offended. "I thought you're the kind of person who makes rules, then breaks them if they feel right." I paused, then smiled. "That's not wrong." He helped me lift the bench, shift the anchor screws. We worked in silence, side by side, the air between us less professional than usual, more personal, more charged. When we finished, I stepped back, wiping sweat from my forehead. "You do good work," he said. "You do fast work." We both laughed, and for a moment it wasn't about the house, or the job, or the past. It was just two people in the quiet finally seeing each other. After that, things shifted. Malik began staying after the crew left. Sometimes he brought extra food, containers of roasted vegetables, lemon chicken, and rice. "I made too much," he'd say, though it was always portioned exactly for two. We sat on the patio most evenings, watching the pool lights ripple across the water, talking about architecture, family, and what it meant to make something lasting. He told me about his father, a mason who taught him how to read the lines of a wall like a language. I told him about the blueprint I'd drawn at 14, the one that still hung in my old bedroom, now Evan's room. One night, I asked, "Why'd you take this job?" "The budget was tight. I wasn't the easiest client." He shrugged. "Your eyes lit up when you talked about the house. That's rare." "Lit up?" I repeated, amused. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Like you saw more than just walls, like you saw a future." I looked down at my drink. I was trying to. I needed to. He didn't push, just nodded. It was the first time I didn't feel embarrassed about needing something deeply. By week 8, the house was complete, fully furnished, and curated to the last detail. I should have felt done, but something in me had just begun. One evening, Malik brought over a small package. "Housewarming gift," he said. Inside was a framed photo of my pool at sunset, taken from the far corner of the yard, golden light spilling over the water. "You took this?" "Yeah." I looked up, throat tight. "It's beautiful." He stepped closer. "So are you when you're proud of something." That was the moment. The air shifted. He reached out, fingers brushing mine. And for the first time since I'd been cast out of the home I once trusted, I felt chosen, not tolerated, not convenient, chosen. When he kissed me, it wasn't a grand gesture, it was a promise. One built, like everything else in my life now, on intention. The following week, Malik invited me to see a community center project he was consulting on. They're building it for kids, STEM labs, art rooms. Thought it might be your thing. And he was right. As we walked through the steel-framed skeleton of the center, something stirred inside me. Not nostalgia, but recognition. A piece of me that remembered why I fell in love with spaces in the first place. Later, over takeout in the back of his truck, he turned serious. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" he asked. "My parents," he nodded. I took a breath. "I don't think they ever understood what they did or why it hurt." That's not a no. No, it's not. We sat in silence, the kind that stretches rather than tightens. Then he said, "You've built something amazing, not just the house, the life, but you don't have to do it alone forever." I looked at him, at the gentle certainty in his eyes. "I don't know how to let someone stay," I admitted. "Everyone leaves, or pushes me out." "I'm not everyone," he said simply. And for the first time, I wanted to believe that. Later that night, sitting by the pool under a sky splashed with stars, I felt a shift inside me. Not seismic, not dramatic, just steady. Like the slow realignment of a compass pointing somewhere new. I turned to Malik and asked, "What if this is part of the future I saw?" He smiled. "Then I guess we're already standing in it." Wasn't a grand finale. No parade, no magazine feature, no viral moment online. Just a Sunday afternoon, mild breeze, a pitcher of lemonade on the patio table, and the slow, steady rhythm of peace. The pool rippled in the sunlight. I'd planted rosemary and thyme along the back wall. A lemon tree had just started to take. And in the kitchen, Malik was humming some tune I didn't recognize while slicing vegetables for dinner. Life had become soft. Not boring, steady, not perfect, but mine. Earlier that morning, Sandra stopped by, not announced, not dramatic, just appeared with a container of baked goods I knew she didn't make herself. "I heard Evan's graduation party's gonna be here," she said. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone light. He asked. I said yes. There was silence. Then, "It's a beautiful space." "Thanks." More silence. Then softer, "You did all this yourself." "With help." Another pause. "I didn't think you could." I looked at her then, not with anger, not even triumph, just clarity. "I know." She glanced at the patio furniture, the plants, and the lemon tree. "You're happy?" "I'm building something. That makes me happy." She nodded. There was a fragility to her I hadn't seen before. Not weakness, just the beginning of understanding. "I'm sorry we didn't make room for you." It wasn't everything, it wasn't a rewrite of history, but it was something. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She left without asking to come inside. Later that night, Evan arrived with folding chairs and a Bluetooth speaker. "Party mode?" he asked. "Just keep the volume under existential crisis," I joked. He grinned. "Got it." We spent the evening setting up string lights, tablecloths, rehearsing our version of a sibling speech. Malik grilled chicken while throwing in a snarky commentary that made us both laugh. At one point, I stepped back to watch them, Malik in my kitchen, Evan dancing barefoot by the pool, the breeze brushed the lemon tree, and I realized something. This wasn't the life I imagined. It was better, not because it was grand, but because it was honest, whole, built not in defiance, but in truth. Later, when guests started to arrive, Sandra came back, this time with Robert. They brought lawn chairs, a casserole, and awkward smiles. Wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Robert nodded at Malik. "You did a good job on the hardscape." Malik gave a polite smile. "Appreciate it." The music played, laughter rose, my backyard was filled with voices, friends, family, people who had shown up when it mattered. I sat on the bench by the pool, the same one I had realigned weeks ago, and let it all soak in. And when Malik came to sit beside me, arm brushing mine, he asked, "You ever think about what's next?" I turned to him, really looked at him. "Yeah," I said, "but I'm not rushing it." He nodded. "Good, 'cause this is enough too." He was right. For now, this was enough. A space that held me. A story that didn't end in exile, but in return, not to the house that pushed me out, but to the self I nearly forgot. As a sanctuary where pain became a blueprint. In love, well, that too was under construction, just like me. As the evening wore on and fairy lights blinked overhead, someone turned up the music and Evan jumped into the pool, fully clothed. Laughter erupted. His, mine, Malik's, and even Robert's muffled chuckle. Sandra sat stiffly on a lounge chair, but I caught her smiling when Evan splashed around like he was 10 again. Later, when most of the guests had left and only close friends remained, Malik and I stood by the fence, looking out at the quiet street. "You know," he said, "there's a grant opening up soon for sustainable housing prototypes. We could apply, together." I blinked, heart skipping. "A real partnership?" He nodded. "Design and build. Your vision, my execution." The thought settled into my bones like warmth. A new project, a future made not from salvage, but from choice. "Let's do it," I said. "Let's build the next thing, our way." He didn't kiss me then, he just reached out and laced his fingers through mine. And that was enough. Because I finally understood that closure doesn't come from apologies or perfect endings.